All right. Let's see if I am showing up. Um, all right. I am showing up on YouTube. And let's see if I'm showing up on. And I'm showing up on Facebook. All right. And I think I've got audio going. Everything's set up right. And I got my computer going, set up. Everything's good. All right. Before I get started, I am going to point out something that I am self-conscious about before. Not because I think anybody cares, but because it is something that I am aware of. And that is my eyelid. My eyelid is very puffy. And I don't know exactly what it is. It's a little sore, a little uncomfortable. It probably looks more problematic and sore than it actually is. But something's going on with my eyelid. It's a little puffy. I'm sorry that it probably looks uncomfortable and therefore distracting. But now that we've acknowledged that I have a puffy eyelid, we can proceed to the rest of what I'm talking about today. I think it's well, I read online that you can get such sores on your eyelids or in your eye area that kids get them often because of dirty hands touching eyelids. But I have found out that you can also get it as an adult when you have kids with dirty hands. I think I think that's the case anyway. Anyway, whatever, it's there. Before I get started, there's a couple announcements that are just bits of information that I wanted to communicate. One is my workshops registration for my workshops is now live at dablon.com/workshops, or you can just go to dablon.com and on the front page there's a button to take you to the workshops. These are live in-person workshops at my studio in Santa Monica. There is limited space, and I gave my previous students an early start on registration. So spaces are filling up very fast. If you're interested in taking a workshop with me at my studio, make sure you go check that out and register as soon as possible. There is a mixed media portrait workshop, which will be the first one that I offer, and that's going to take place a week from this Saturday, a week from this Friday and Saturday. There is also going to be a resin workshop, a mixed media figure drawing workshop with live models, and a mixed media abstraction workshop. So those are the 4 different workshops about every 2 weeks over the course of the next couple months. So go check that out. That's at dablon.com/workshops. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is that the 4th episode of my podcast, which is the same name, Dabbleon, Dabbleon. The 4th episode is live, and in it I talked to my studio mate, David Lloyd, and it was a really good conversation. I'm really happy with it, and I think you will enjoy listening to it. You can find that on iTunes or on the website as well, dabbleon.com or dabbleon.com/podcast. So take a look at that. If you are enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe. You can do that at the website. And tell people about it. Tell people who you think might be interested. It's a podcast that I'm really enjoying doing, and I would love to be able to continue to do it. So your support is appreciated. So with that, this is the live broadcast, Thursdays here, 11 a.m. Los Angeles time. And in it, my intention here, the purpose is to talk about your work. So whoever you may be, wherever you are in the world, I'd like to take a look at your work and talk about it. I think there's a lot to be learned from just from discussing what's working, what's not working in people's artwork. I would prefer that it be artwork that you are either currently working on, so works in progress, or recently finished, so that we can keep this conversation kind of focused on current work. I think there's an energy in that and inspiration that can come from that. So that is the intention here for this broadcast. I will also just be on occasion discussing ideas and thoughts and maybe other artists as well. So that's what this is all about. If you're interested in participating, you'd like me to talk about your work, I'm not mean, pretty tame critiquer. But if you would like to submit images, you can do so by emailing me at dabbleon@gmail.com. Send me a few images and a description, if you want to, of what you'd like me to talk about. All right, without further ado, let's get to the images that I was sent for today. This is going to be a revisiting of a painting that I believe I have discussed already in this broadcast, which I'm kind of excited about because changes have been made, and it's always interesting to revisit an image and see how it's evolved and see how perhaps some of the previous problems have been solved, or what remains, what keeps on causing difficulty. So let me switch over to my computer here. And there we go. So this is the image that was sent. I was actually Siri. I don't want to talk to Siri right now. This artist sent me 3 different versions of the image, which was very, very helpful. This is a version of the image that is just cropped into the image. She also sent me a picture of it in context in the room. And I wanted to point this out because there is, from this perspective, I can see that there is some shininess. I don't know if that's silver leaf or something akin to that, maybe a silver kind of paint, metallic paint, but that shininess is going to affect how we perceive the artwork, and it's going to affect the composition and what grabs our attention. So we don't get a sense of that shininess looking at it directly here. Now that I know it's there, I know I can kind of see it. But obviously in this picture, it's much more visible, and I'm glad I know it's there. That would definitely affect my reaction to it, my response to it. So multiple perspectives on the work can be very helpful in terms of us understanding what's going on there, especially maybe in different lighting. And then this last image that she sent me was a version where she had taken out the little girl that is in the composition here in the first one. And I wanted to point this out because I think it's a good opportunity just to remind us all that we have some really fantastic digital tools that can help us experiment with changing our compositions without doing any damage to them, right? So I imagine in this case, this artist took a picture with her phone or her iPad, took it into a simple drawing app, and just used a brush to brush over that little girl. And sometimes, even in the studio, with analog materials, if something is not quite sitting right, or something's wrong, I don't really understand what is causing problems, sometimes I'll just cut out a piece of paper and put it over different areas of the image or the composition and see what happens to my perception of the rest of the composition when I remove things. So there's a way to do that digitally that's much easier, obviously, and accessible, and I think it can be a very, very, very good tool, a really helpful tool to help us see what's going on, what's working and not working, and why. So I was very pleased to see that she would send me this and that she's working with that as a tool. And I think it can be a hugely helpful way to see what's working, what's not working. Okay, so along the same lines, what I'm going to do today with this is start removing things that are grabbing my attention. And see when I remove those little eye traps, right? That's not a word. That's not a term. But when I remove those things that are grabbing my attention, how that shifts my interpretation, how my interaction with the overall composition, because I think there are some things to be learned there. This artist requested specifically that I talk about whether or not this little girl, I'm going to zoom in there. There's a little collaged image of a little girl sitting here in the bottom right-hand corner. In the previous critique, I believe I recommended that she kind of maybe emphasize the gaze of the little girl into the scene, maybe as a way to strengthen an implied relationship between this subject matter over here and the little girl, kind of make sense of them together and strengthen the visual statement. And I think that's successful. But she requested that I specifically talk about whether or not she should move that little girl, which is why she sent this one without the little girl in it. Okay, so I wanted to discuss that, but there are some other things that I think are worth looking at as well. So first, what I'm going to do is, in Photoshop, I'm going to duplicate that layer so I can keep a copy of the original, so we can do kind of a before and after comparison. And in Photoshop there, the artist did a really good job on the iPad, but Photoshop is a little bit more sophisticated in its ability to remove things. So what I'm going to do is, on this copied version, I'm just going to kind of draw a selection around that little girl. And for those of you that are interested in what I'm doing, I'm going to go to Edit and down to Fill. And there's an option here that says I want the Content Aware Fill. So what I'm putting in that fill is basically the computer's going to try to figure out what it can put in there and match things that are around it. So I'm going to hit OK. And voila, the little girl is gone, and it's replaced instead by some information that is extrapolated or kind of based on the information that is surrounding. So if I do click that layer off, you can see the little girl there, and now she's gone. And that is some Photoshop magic right there. Okay, so without the little girl there, what starts to happen to my eye is I realize now, without her there, how much of a focal point she was, right? She really was grabbing my attention. When we're working with a combination of abstraction and representation, realize that as human beings, we're always looking for patterns. We're looking for meaning, right? So if there is a representational image there, of course that's going to grab our attention and hold us there, right? Because it's something we recognize. It's something familiar. So of course our eye's going to just inevitably going to be a really strong pull to that. Not only that, but it was a little girl. So there's a psychological and emotional aspect to that representational image, right? The abstract information that's in the rest of the composition is fairly aggressive, high contrast, lots of stuff going on. So this pairing of all this really aggressive visual information with a little girl, maybe there's a psychology there, and that was part of the meaning originally. That's why the little girl was added, because of this contrast between the tumult and the chaos of the world and the messages that are kind of swirling around in the world, and our children or younger generations being exposed to that chaos. I think that was part of the original intended visual statement or meaning of the image. So so once we get rid of that girl, it frees us up from being locked down here in the bottom right corner. And now our attention is able to kind of move around the rest of the composition and see more clearly what else is going on, right? It's as if that little girl was just like, I don't know, like you're in listening to a concert and a little baby starts to cry, right? It's like it's almost impossible to hear the rest of the music going on with a little baby crying, because you're like just totally absorbed by that noise of the baby crying, right? Anyway, I don't know if that's a very good analogy, but once that focal point is gone, now all of a sudden I see the rest of the composition more clearly. And that's the point here, is that sometimes removing those little areas of that are problematic, if they are problematic, or areas that are grabbing our attention, removing those can help us then see the rest of the composition more clearly. And I think that's definitely the case here. So now with her gone, what I'm also noticing is that my eyes getting caught up on these words, right? We've got land of the free, we've got as they look, we've got red, and then something else up there. And this is another good point. Not only are we going to be naturally drawn to representational imagery, right? Not only are we going to look for representation in abstraction, right? We always look for in abstraction, inevitably we'll find a little mark that looks like something else, right? Not only are we drawn to do that, but when we see symbolic information, text, right? Patterns that have additional meaning, text is almost as I don't want to say distracting, but it's almost as visually attractive as a representational image, right? So with the little girl gone, and my attention is freed up to start roaming around the image, I find myself getting caught up on these words. And again, that's part of the meaning, right? She wanted there to be these words, these phrases that have a lot of meaning and that are part of this kind of swirling information. What we've got to decide is whether or not those words are helping or if they are distracting, right? So even though they're an important part of the meaning, are ultimately, are they making the image stronger, or are they bringing undue attention? Are they becoming too strong and overwhelming the strength of the rest of the composition and the rest of the visual experience, right? So let's do the same thing that I just did with that little girl. I'm going to select these bits of text where it says red up here, and then I'm going to go down here to Land of the Free. That's where I find my attention mostly getting distracted, those two. There are other bits in here. There's this down here where it says free something or other, and then as you look, actually I'm going to grab that as well. And it looks like I lost my selection up here. I'll add that back. Okay, so these three little spots of text I find are really grabbing my attention. I find my eye just keeps on getting drawn over to those areas. So let's see what happens when I do the same thing. I'm going to go to Edit, down to Fill, do a content-aware fill, and let the computer kind of fill those areas in with, information that mimics whatever is surrounding it. All right. So now I'm going to flip back and forth between this is now without those bits of text, and this is with those bits of text and the little girl, right? And hopefully you can see, I don't know if you guys can see this as well as I can. My screen's much bigger probably than what you're looking at, but can you see how dramatically having those bits of text and the little girl there grabs your attention, right? If we got rid of a couple of these colors and shapes in the center of the composition, even though they're in the middle and they're saturated colors and they're interesting shapes, it wouldn't nearly have the effect on us and our interaction with this image as getting rid of the text and the girl does, right? So our attention is commanded by different kinds of visual information differently, our attention, right? And that's going to affect how we read the image. So this is all a balancing act, right? We got to think about what we're trying to communicate and if the elements that we're including are helping or not. And we got to decide how necessary these elements are. If it is absolutely necessary that you have those bits of text, then we've got to figure out how to integrate them without them overpowering the rest of the composition, right? But if it's not necessary to have them, get rid of them, right? Maybe it was a good idea, but it didn't pan out and they just got to go. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of those, and it's kind of a breath of relief getting rid of the text. Now, if I really kind of keep on moving, my eyes moving, I do feel a little bit of draw to that bit of text under there because, my brain is trying to find things it recognizes, and it sees text and it locks in on that. So it kind of, but not as much, right? And there's text on these little pieces of paper that I could, so there's enough of text that's more or less that same size, and this is obscured enough where I don't really get caught up on that like I was on those bigger statements and bits of text. So now I can just see what's happening in the larger composition. And I'm actually just, my initial response is that I am liking it a lot better without those things there. I'm appreciating and able to get involved a lot more deeply with all this other really interesting visual information and the shapes and the colors and these patterns of circles and the way you're guiding me through the images with these larger foundational divisions of space and geometry that I just find it a lot more compelling visually as an experience and as a statement. It's more cohesive. I don't get kind of pulled in disparate, different directions by having those little bits of text that were pulling me out of the center and toward the side. So sometimes, we want people to move around the composition. But in this case, having those really strong focal points kind of on the very, very edge, right next to the edge of the composition, that lock us in there, it's almost as if they don't allow us, they like keep us right on, like circling around the edge of the composition and don't allow us to enter in and really appreciate what's going on there. So, I don't know. Hopefully this, this probably contradicts what I said in my first response. And I am not going to pretend to be contradiction free. I'm a different person each day, and I have new eyes each day. Maybe it's my puffy eyelid that's changing my response. Anyway. Hopefully this is not frustrating in that I'm maybe saying something different than I said in my first response to it. Okay, so generally taking the text and the image out is, to me, a good thing. I'm liking it more. I like the shapes more. I like the abstraction more. I'm not distracted by the text and the meaning of the text and the little girl and the kinds of associations I have with the little girl. And I still feel like some of the intended message here of the chaos of messaging, right? You've got little blips of words, but not so much that we lock in on a phrase or some kind of, motto or statement. So I think the intended meaning of there being this chaos of messaging and not knowing really how to navigate that, and maybe bits of order or attempted order to tie these things together are implied by the way you've got this circle and other bigger shapes. So I don't know. I think some of your intended meaning is still there, even without those more literal bits of text and representation. So what I wanted to do here real quickly is just pull apart the foundation of this composition. So we've got a lot of little bits of information, right? But those little bits of information are, as an accumulation, right, are actually defining larger compositional divisions of space, larger shapes that are actually quite strong. So what I mean by this, for example, is we've got all these little bits of torn paper that together create this big, big ellipse, right? It's not a perfect circle, it's an ellipse. So generally speaking, we got a big circle that's sitting kind of off center, which is a good call, right? Asymmetry is going to be more interesting, more active. So if that circle had been centered or evenly spaced from the edges, it wouldn't be as interesting a composition, I don't think. So we've got this big circle that's kind of offset. You notice that it's not really equidistant from any of the sides. It's the shortest distance between it and the side is on the left side here. But top and bottom are different, left and right are different, and then left, right, top, and bottom. All three of these distances from the edges of the composition are different, which is good. That's variety, right? We want variety. We want asymmetry um, in the context of making these paintings, these visual images, because we want movement, we want engagement, we want a viewer to have to enter in and stay a while, right, and occupy the composition rather than just it being a quick read and out. Okay, so we've got this really strong compositional dynamic of the square of the canvas, and then this big circle that's kind of offset in that square. That's very strong. We've also got very strong, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to, let's do that and get rid of that. So we also have strong diagonals. So there's a kind of football shape happening right here, or I shape. And that's even accentuated by this triangular shape in the gold leaf down here. So we've got this kind of football shape happening there, which is also emphasized by this shape, this kind of gray haze in the corner right there. And then also, I would say that this mass of shapes and colors also kind of define a shape in this area. So I'm going to, maybe I make that brush a little bit harder so it's a little bit more apparent what I'm talking about, and make the brush smaller. So again, I've got this shape right here with the gray area. I've kind of got a shape in here that's this overall, all these torn bits of paper, and again, this is a sub-shape to the overall circle. And then I've got kind of this corner or this triangle over here where I've got this accumulation of little dots of blue and variations on blue. And then this corner up here, that's kind of a triangle, right? So I'm gonna, maybe I'll clean that up a bit. So let me simplify that a little bit here to, come on, to that. So generally I've got the square with a big circle offset in the square, and then I've also got these kind of groupings that make sense. Again, I'm trying to look at this kind of visual foundation that I see present here. And again, I've got kind of this asymmetry where this corner is a little bit bigger and a little bit of a different angle than this corner down at the bottom. This shape, even though it kind of mirrors this shape up here, these two shapes kind of mirror each other, it's a little bit smaller. So I've got, you know, these big divisions of space and these big kind of general underlying visual foundation that already have a really interesting amount of variety. So compositionally, there's a lot of really strong. So what does that foundation do? That strong foundation, it's like the tide on the ocean, right? That moves us. It's got a stronger movement, a stronger power underneath there, and then all of this little detailed visual information, that small bits of paper, small dots of paint. That's like the chop on the surface, right? So the chop on the surface is important and it grabs our attention. It's really interesting and gets us to look. But what really moves us around the composition are these big shapes, these big divisions, these big points of contrast. And I think that's working really well. I think these little dots of different variations on blue are a new addition, or maybe are just more accentuated than they were before. So within these shapes that I just drew out, like this triangle down here, then there are further sub-shapes. So there's kind of a hot point of this lighter blue that gradates out into darker blue. So this could be divided up into a sub-shape, and then of course those sub-shapes could be increasingly divided up into smaller and smaller until we get into individual little dots of texture, right? Anyways, I'm perhaps belaboring the point, but now with the text gone, with the little girl gone, What I'm able to see more clearly is just these overall issues of composition, how it's working, how it could be improved. So, you know, I guess, yeah, take that for what it's worth. Um, my feeling would be to get rid of the text, get rid of the little girl. I think you've got such a compelling abstract image here that those things are just distracting from it, and I don't think it makes them better. Sometimes that text and the girl, they're so literal that they almost tie us down to too narrow of an interpretation, which I think is a disservice to what you're accomplishing here visually in the abstraction, right? It becomes such a larger, more impactful, deeper visual statement when we're allowed to project upon it our own meaning without being tied down too literally with that imagery. Anyway, I can think of ways that I would disagree with that statement that I just said, but hopefully you kind of get the feeling that sometimes just um, abstraction has a kind of power in its generality and its ability to kind of engage us on a more general kind of overarching, less literal way, more kind of emotional, more interpretive. All right, so what else did I want to say? Oh, what I was going to do here is let's say that these bits of text were very important. Let's say they needed to be there for whatever reason. Like I've decided, I'm the artist, I've decided that I really want text to be in there. Having those statements is a really important part of this work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste that text on a different layer. Let's see. No, that didn't do what I thought it was going to do, or did it? Yes. Okay. So now I've copied and pasted that land of the free statement on a different layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to experiment with taking it into a different part of the composition. So let's just pull it over to the center right there, right? So now I've got these compositional divisions that are kind of directing my eye toward the center of the circle. The circle itself is kind of a framing device that implies that maybe the artist wants me to end up or focus on here. This is kind of a natural focal point. So bringing that text, which is a very strong visual statement and going to grab our attention, away from the edge and placing it where the artist is telling me my attention should go, right? I've got a lot of clues here that are pointing me toward the center or kind of this area of the composition. Some of these little intersections of lines kind of coalesce at this point a little bit. Putting that strong, that text right there is much more comfortable to me. Like this feels a lot less dissonant, I guess is the word that comes to mind right now. A lot less dissonant. It doesn't feel like it feels like what you intend and what's actually happening are the same, right? Whereas when it's off to the side, it feels like you want me to look here, but I keep on getting pulled over to this bit of text. So if you do want that text to be there, I know it's a big, I know it's not going to happen. You're not going to get that little collage element to come up and re-glue it down. But I'm saying that it works better here than it did over to the side. So if you needed to have text there, maybe find another statement or another collage element that you could use and use it to reinforce the area, the focal point that you're already kind of pointing us to with all the rest of your composition. And let me do the same here, maybe in a different way with this other text. I've got this up here that says red. So what if I copy and paste that onto a new layer? I'm going to drag it up here. And what if I pull that away from the corner where it's kind of distracting me, and maybe place it a little bit closer to the, like, inside the circle, right? The circle again is kind of framing this area. Maybe that's going to be less distracting. I'm going to erase some parts around it so it's kind of integrated a little bit more with the surrounding information. So again, it's not kind of an an eye trap. I think that's what I called it earlier. It's not an eye trap kind of wanting me to keep on calling to me off to the corner and keeping me from being able to enter in what's happening in this kind of this, implied focal point in the center. The other thing I could do with this, if I wanted to keep it, is I could just de-emphasize it, kind of like you've de-emphasized this bit of text down here by covering it up or obscuring it with paint on top of it to the point where it just kind of sits in the background and doesn't grab our attention as much. I could, for example, go, maybe the easiest way to do that would just be to start grabbing colors from the surrounding area and just making it less contrasty. The hard edges of that collage element are grabbing my attention, so maybe just breaking up those edges a little bit more. So see how this kind of really strong point right there. Let me zoom in a little bit. These points, these high contrast hard edges are grabbing my attention. So kind of going in and de-emphasizing those or breaking them up a little bit so they're integrated a little bit more into the surrounding information. That would be a one way to de-emphasize, right? So now it's starting to sit back a little bit. I would, these big negative shapes in between the letters of that lighter color are bigger than any of the collage elements or brush marks in the area around it. So they're, just the scale of them is kind of standing out. So you might want to just, break those up so those white areas in between the letters aren't as big. So that would be another way to deal with text or representational imagery that's grabbing our attention. And really, is the case with any unintended focal point or any focal point or area of emphasis that's grabbing our attention too much, right? And distracting us from being able to move around to the other parts of the images or move around in a way that we intend, right? The way to deal with those is to de-emphasize, right? If we have an unintentional focal point, you de-emphasize that and or emphasize more the intended focal point, which, again, from what I can tell, the kind of focal point that you seem to be setting us up to me kind of feels like it is in this area. You've got these strong diagonals pointing us up into this area. You've got these bigger, thicker lines that are kind of intersecting. There's a lot of things, I'm going to turn that land of the free, but there are things here that are pointing me to that area right there. So the last thing that I'll say here is that because that is kind of seems to be where you're pointing me to, and this is, might be annoying for me to say this because I've said similar things. I can remember saying similar things in my last critique, but because without the text there, without the little girl there, it really starts to become clear that you're pointing me up in this direction, kind of in this area. I kind of want more of a payoff there. I know I hesitate to say that because that is not specific enough, but I don't know what that might mean. And, my suspicion is that I would have a slightly different take on it if I saw this in person because of the shininess of some of I know you have this kind of silver leaf area that's shiny, and that might be enough of a payoff, to draw me in kind of to this general area, those shiny bits of foil. Maybe a few strategically placed bits of shiny foil kind of in this general area. I don't think you need to blast us with it. I don't think you need to overdo it, but a little bit more visual interest, a little bit more of a visual payoff kind of in this general area would clarify things for me. Like, I feel like, again, you're sending me to this general area. I want there to be kind of more of a zing, more of a reason for me to go there. Like, you're giving me a reason to end up at this location. You're telling me go there, and you got to give me the payoff, right? You got to like, oh, here's why I'm here. Right? So maybe a little something higher contrast. There's a million ways that you could put a little bit more of a pop there. I hesitate to be too specific. You might want to experiment with different ways to add a little zing in there on your iPad. You might want to just take a little bit of silver leaf and not glue it down, just lightly, get the surface wet and put a little surface silver leaf on that on water so it sticks to the canvas without it being permanently attached, and then stand back and see how that affects it. Those are some of the things that I would try to experiment with that, but I think that's generally what I would say. Or the final thing, actually, you know what? Let me go to this layer, and I'm going to say a little, that green is horrific. Definitely don't do that. But some final little bit of payoff in this general area, or leave it alone. Leave it as it is. Again, I'd get rid of the little girl in the text if it were me. And I think you could leave it as it is, just without them there, and it works well. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening there. And I think you could leave it alone and be satisfied that you made a rocking little painting. Not a little painting. This is actually 4 feet by 4 feet, which I didn't know before either. So the scale of this thing is hard to appreciate, but knowing that it's that large, like it would be a really impressive thing to run into and a lot of fun to engage with and look at, even if you didn't do anything else. So, in conclusion, my friends, this is just an opinion. I say the little girl's got to go unless she has to be there, right? Ultimately, this is your call, right? You've got to decide whether or not she is really important to what you had intended, to what you want for the piece, what you want to communicate. I don't think she needs to be there. And I think it is more interesting without her there. And the rest of the composition is better for her absence. It's better without her there. And I would say same for the text. Unless you really need to have that text there, unless that's really an important thing to you, I'd get rid of it. If it does need to be there, then I'd figure out how to de-emphasize it a little bit more, so we can be less drawn to it and be able to appreciate more the abstract parts of the image. And I think with that, I don't know if I did a before and after. Let me go back real quick and I'm just going to pop back and forth. I've already done, I guess I did this a little bit, but before with the text and the little girl, after, before, after, before, after. Your call. Thanks for sharing this image again. You've made a lot of changes. I could have brought in the one I critiqued last time if I could find it, so we could see what other changes you've made. But a really compelling piece, and I think really well done. A lot of really cool textures, a lot of really cool colors, and patterns happening there. And I like this little this little busyness, this little hum and buzz of little dots, kind of a pointless fuzz, pointless fuzz, a pointless fuzz happening out there in the corners, which I think adds to the energy that's brought in by some of those bigger shapes and bigger pieces of collage. If you would like me to talk about your artwork in a future Thursday broadcast, please send images to Dabbleon, DABBLEON, at gmail.com. Check out the 4th episode of my podcast, which is also called Dabbleon. That can be found on iTunes or on the website, dabbleon.com/podcast. If you want to be informed of future classes, online and in-person classes, you can sign up for my email list at dabbleon.com. Up at the top, it says subscribe for more information or something like that. And then also, if you're in the Santa Monica area or LA area and want to join me in my studio for live in-person workshops, I'm fully vaccinated. Everybody in my studio is fully vaccinated. I think it's pretty safe. I'm ready to get back to in-person meeting and teaching. If you're interested in those workshops in the area, go and register soon, because they are filling up and there's not many spaces. I can only accommodate, a fairly small group. So make sure you go register for those if you're interested as soon as possible at dabbleon.com/workshops. And I think that's about it. I hope you all have a fantastic day, fantastic weekend, and I will be here again next week on Thursday at 11 a.m. Los Angeles time. Send me images of your work as soon as possible. Don't wait, till right before I start. I need a little bit of time to think and experiment in Photoshop before I start the broadcast. So if you want me to look at or talk about your work, please send it. Give me at least a day, ideally. If not, send it whenever. And I will try to talk about it on the broadcast. And with that, I will say goodbye. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.